Hello, and welcome to the channel. Today, we sail back over 500 years to tell the story of one of history's most famous and most debated figures, Christopher Columbus. Columbus was born around 1451 in Genoa, which is now part of Italy. He was a mariner, a sailor, from a young age, and the sea was his life. This was the time of the Age of Exploration, a period when European countries were desperate to find new, faster routes to the rich lands of Asia, often called the Indies. Why? Because Asian goods, things like spices, pepper, cinnamon, silk, and gold, were extremely valuable in Europe. However, the existing land routes to the east were long, dangerous, and controlled by other powers. Columbus, studying maps and books, developed a truly revolutionary idea. Most educated people at the time already knew the Earth was round, but Columbus had a unique and very strong belief. He believed the Earth was much smaller than others calculated. He thought he could reach the east, not by sailing east around Africa, but by sailing west across the vast, unknown Atlantic Ocean. Columbus had the dream, but he did not have the money. A journey like this required ships, supplies, and a large crew. He spent almost a decade trying to convince European monarchs to fund his plan. His first stop was Portugal, a country famous for its excellent sailors and navigation skills. King John II of Portugal heard Columbus's plan, but ultimately rejected it. The king's advisors believed Columbus was wrong about the size of the Earth, and they had a different route around the coast of Africa that was already proving successful. Columbus then turned to Spain. At the time, Spain was ruled by King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella I, often called the Catholic Monarchs. These were busy and powerful rulers who were focused on driving the last of the Muslim rulers out of Spain. For 7 long years, Columbus waited and argued. He finally gained an audience just after the city of Granada, the last Moorish stronghold, fell to the Spanish. Queen Isabella, perhaps inspired by the victory and the desire for Spanish glory and wealth, finally agreed. She provided Columbus with the necessary ships and resources for the historic journey. This crucial agreement was called the Capitulations of Santa Fe. Finally, on August 3, 1492, the historic journey began. Columbus set sail from Palos de la Frontera, Spain. He had command of 3 small ships called caravels, the Niña, the Pinta, and the larger flagship, the Santa María. In total, there were about 90 men on board. The journey was long and full of fear. Sailors believed that monsters lived in the uncharted waters, or that they might sail right off the edge of the world. The first part of the journey was slow, but once they passed the Canary Islands, they entered the open Atlantic, where the strong trade winds pushed them west. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into more than 2 months. The crew grew tired, sick, and very anxious. They saw strange signs in the water, birds, floating weeds, but no land. The distance traveled was further than anyone had ever sailed before. The sailors were ready to mutiny or rebel against Columbus. They feared they would never find a way to sail back east against the strong winds. Columbus, however, was determined. He had to use all his leadership skills, promising rewards and threatening punishment, to keep his crew moving forward. Finally, after 36 days completely out of sight of land, in the early hours of October 12, 1492, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana, aboard the Pinta, shouted the most important words of the entire journey: "Tierra, tierra." Land, land. The land they saw was an island in what is now the Bahamas. Columbus named it San Salvador, which means Holy Savior. On the morning of October 12th, Columbus and a small party landed. They carried the royal banner of Spain and knelt to claim the land in the name of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Columbus believed, right until the day he died, that he had reached the eastern outskirts of Asia, the East Indies. That is why the islands he found were soon called the West Indies. The first people they met were the native inhabitants, the Taíno, part of the Arawak people. Columbus described them in his log as gentle and generous. They were curious about the Europeans' clothes, beards, and ships. The Taíno people helped the Spanish explore the new land. Columbus quickly noticed the gold ornaments the Taíno wore. This immediately changed the focus of the mission from simply finding a trade route to finding wealth. They continued exploring the region, discovering the large islands of Cuba and Hispaniola, now Haiti and the Dominican Republic. On Christmas Eve, the Santa María ran aground and was destroyed. Columbus used the remaining wood to build a small fort, La Navidad, where he left 39 of his men. In January 1493, Columbus set sail back to Spain, bringing back a small amount of gold, some plants, and several captured Taíno people as proof of his success. When Columbus returned to Spain in 1493, he was a hero. The Spanish crown was delighted with the news of new lands and the promise of great riches. They quickly organized a much larger expedition, and Columbus set sail on his second voyage later that same year. This time, he commanded a fleet of 17 ships and nearly 1,500 men, not just sailors but soldiers, priests, and colonists. The goal was no longer just exploration. It was colonization. When they arrived at the site of Fort La Navidad, they found that all the men left behind had been killed, likely due to their own aggressive actions toward the Taíno people. Columbus established a new settlement, Isabela, in Hispaniola. He was named governor and viceroy of the new territories. However, Columbus proved to be a poor governor. He failed to manage the Spanish colonists, and more tragically, his administration introduced a forced labor system, demanding gold from the native Taíno. When the Taíno people could not provide enough gold, the Spanish forced them into slavery. The native population suffered terribly from this abuse and from European diseases against which they had no immunity. Historians agree that the arrival of Columbus marked the beginning of enormous suffering and a drastic decline in the native population of the Caribbean islands. Columbus made 2 more voyages, in 1498 and 1502, exploring the coasts of South and Central America. But his failure to maintain order and his harsh rule led the Spanish monarchs to lose faith in him. By his third voyage, he was sent back to Spain in chains, stripped of his titles as governor. Despite being disgraced and losing his governorship, Columbus did make a final fourth voyage in 1502. However, it brought him little success and more hardship. He returned to Spain, financially struggling and ill. Christopher Columbus died on May 20th, 1506, in Valladolid, Spain. He died still believing that he had found a new, quicker route to Asia, and that the lands he found were part of the East Indies. He never truly knew the vast scale of his discovery, that he had connected the European world with two completely new continents, North and South America. Today, Columbus's story is understood in two very different ways. For centuries, he was celebrated as a great hero, a brave explorer, and the man who discovered America. But in modern times, many people focus on the severe negative consequences of his actions, the enslavement, the violence, and the ultimate destruction of the native cultures he encountered. Historians now recognize him not just as an explorer, but as a figure who triggered the beginning of the European conquest of the Americas, with all its tragic consequences. In conclusion, Christopher Columbus was a man of extraordinary determination and courage. His voyages completely changed the course of world history, connecting two hemispheres and beginning the movement of people, animals, plants, and goods known as the Columbian Exchange. However, we must remember that history is complex. Columbus's story is a powerful lesson in two sides of history: the story of an ambitious explorer and the story of the devastating beginning of colonization for the people of the Americas. His actions set in motion a period of profound change, both positive and negative, that continues to influence our world today. He truly remains one of history's most essential and complex figures. Thank you for joining us on this historical voyage. Now, it's time for you to practice your English. What did you think of Christopher Columbus's life and legacy? Tell us in the comments. Use one new English word you learned today, maybe mariner, mutiny, or consequence, to describe your opinion of his story. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more history lessons designed to help you master the English language. See you next time.